So, it is September 1st. It has been many more days of finding new lows of depression. According to the last thing I heard from the lawyer, he still doesn't have a lawyer. He doesn't have any representation at all. He tried to retain someone, but no one seems to want to deal with the case. I wonder why. So, that's the story. He's going unrepresented, basically, as far as I understand, for the sentencing hearing, which is like, so what? He's already been charged. But anyways, yeah. So I'm so nervous. I am just expecting the worst right now. It's only 12:30, and I just have my phone here, and I'm just kind of staring at it, just being like, she's gonna call me and say something. And if she doesn't call me today and say something, she's gonna call me tomorrow and say something. Something that's gonna end up postponing it again, basically, yeah. So, I'm scared. But anyways, I figured I obviously can't vlog in the courtroom, as has been established. So to give you guys context as to my nerves, why my nerves are what they are leading up to it, and what I have to say after, presuming tomorrow happens and the sentencing hearing actually goes forward, figured why not read the statement for you, to give you just an understanding of what I said to the judge, and what was heard and what was decided after that based on that. So, yeah. I'm gonna read my impact statement now. Which, keep in mind, despite my advice that I gave on my video about this, I did a video about impact statements, I went against my own advice and I rewrote it 3 times. Still don't advise doing that. So it's longer than it was. But it's going to sound choppy at certain points, because the lawyer has blacked out all kinds of different spots, which, in my opinion, are some of the most impactful parts. And some parts didn't even need to be blacked out. They were just like within a paragraph of stuff, and I'm very annoyed about it. Very annoyed. Thoroughly. But she basically just said that she did the best she could to ensure that what was most important is still said, and that there isn't any conflict that can create delay again. So, in her professional opinion, she just thought it was for the best. I am agitated, to say the least, but it is what it is. So, if it sounds choppy, that's why. Because there's literally blacked out parts that I did write, and it did flow, but anyway, sort of. Yeah, it's there. I couldn't put the camera in the right position, so I'm gonna read it now. So, okay. Oh, I'm so anxious. Not even to just read it, but just everything. Okay. So, I suppose it would be appropriate to begin by thanking everyone in the room for being willing to hear what I have to say. Though I should be honest, I'd really rather not be here. Writing this statement has caused me exceptional emotional agony and even pushed me to suicidal thoughts. I humbly admit that the pain of my abuse, combined with this trial and topped off with having to write and rewrite this statement, has left me much more able to empathize with substance abusers. For the past 3 months or so, I've woken every day and gone to sleep every night longing to no longer be able to feel at all, for all the mental anguish I've been experiencing every waking moment, as these proceedings seem to face an endless stream of delays. When first handed the paperwork for this statement, now years ago, I honestly didn't plan to do it at all. I figured I'd be forced to testify and defend every detail of my experience on the stand anyways, so why rehash it even further by stressing myself to also write this impact statement? But then, as we're all aware, a plea was submitted the day that the trial was to finally begin, after being delayed as long as possible, so I never testified, and thus, here I stand. As I'm sure most all victims who go through this process tend to feel, at the beginning, I very much didn't want to testify, and have to revisit all the horrors I've been through in any way. It was bad enough enduring the abuse itself. Why would I want to once again relive it by explaining every detail to a bunch of strangers, then arguing about it with a defense attorney? But after being put through this grueling process for so long, forced to hold on to the memories of these traumatizing events acutely for years longer than I otherwise would have, and having the proceedings deliberately delayed at every possible opportunity, all on top of already having endured the 6 years of actual abuse I originally reported, I feel a bit differently now. Now I want to have a legal representative who I know my father will respect, hear the things he's done to me, and truly understand just how ill he must be to have made such decisions. But despite being tortured with having to hold on to these memories and being put through over 3 years of fearing having to endlessly retell and prove the suffering I had gone through, I don't actually get the validation of having Your Honor hear all the abuse I had originally reported. On one hand, I do appreciate being relieved of the stress that testifying would have most certainly entailed, but I'm also rather concerned that only hearing the impacts of the abuse I faced rather than the actual acts of abuse themselves won't fully convey the true intensity of my father's illness. The facts that were read out during the plea hearing seem to hardly touch on the fact that I faced so much extreme abuse every day of my life for 6 years straight, to the point that after spending over 2 hours talking basically non-stop with Officer Sutherland, it was still impossible to recall and report everything I'd been through because the abuse had simply become how I lived. Regardless, I do appreciate that I'm being allowed to make this statement at all, and at least have some level of impact on the sentencing process. So I feel the first issue I need to address is that being forced through this process, along with having it deliberately delayed at every interval legally possible, has left me more confused than ever as to who this person actually is to me. Do I refer to him as the defendant, my guardian, my father? I don't know anymore. When I was 13 years old, this man came into my life promising me a future I could only see as a dream at the time. Seeing I came from an impoverished and neglectful environment, and knowing I was already a victim of child molestation before even meeting him, he promised to be a parent I didn't think existed. One who would care for me, for my needs, and truly put my necessities as a child before his own selfish desires. And also one who would help me get through to post-secondary education, which seemed impossible to me at the time. In the beginning, he appeared to be the nicest person I'd ever met, stopping to help someone with their vehicle at every opportunity, holding doors and offering complete strangers help if they seemed in need for any reason. He also came to my every beck and call, always seeming to be completely willing to jump to any need I ever had. But since that time, his interactions with others and myself gradually grew more and more hostile. Last time I saw him in public, he was creating confrontation and problems where there clearly wasn't any, and awkwardly clashing with many people for inexplicable reasons. Further, he clearly ripped all possibility of having a true parent away from me in his selfish acts of choosing to rape and beat me for years. And I've also since come to learn that he never actually told my mother he wanted me to live with him, and thus she never realized I had been manipulated into moving away from her until long after the fact. But unaware of this at the time, and on the promise that he would offer me the care, love, support, and guidance I lacked from my birth parents, I naively moved into his spare room, and shortly thereafter had him convince me that his rape was necessary to somehow save me from teen pregnancy. After the first time he raped me, I rolled over, crying myself to sleep and thinking, it's a price I'm willing to pay to get out of poverty and away from my mother. You don't pay your family to care for you, and yet for some reason I felt I had to pay him for the care he was providing me. I thought that the pain and agony he was putting me through was suffering that I had to endure in order to get ahead in life and obtain the education required to escape the poverty of my childhood. I trusted him to make the right decisions for my future, and he told me that allowing him to rape me would ensure that future. It never felt right, but I was 14 and I didn't yet have the cognitive abilities to defend against his manipulation. So I trusted him to tell me what the right decisions were, and this is why I'm racked with so much guilt and confusion over everything he's put me through. I feel that I somehow allowed him to rape me, that it was in some way a choice I made and am responsible for. And that's the most unfair part of it all. I trusted him to tell me what decisions were right, and he often did, but when it came to his abuse, he greedily took what he wanted, beat me when I objected, and convinced me it was always my fault. And unfortunately, the shame I carry over all of this has caused me great grief and strife whenever trying to have relationships with others. He also convinced my young 14-year-old mind that my bad attitude wasn't changing fast enough, and that he had to be violent and physically beat on me to somehow snap my attitude in line. He began hitting, wrestling, and chasing me around the places we lived, as well as literally turning the items of the house upside down, all while telling me I was making him do it. Him turning the house upside down consisted of emptying all of my drawers, my closet, flipping my bed, the couch, emptying kitchen cupboards and drawers, and even emptying the garbage cans all over everything as well. At times he would be so upset with me that he would make me lay in the garbage and tell me that I would have to sleep there for the night, though he never left me there more than an hour or so. He also began a regular gaslighting routine of kicking me out of the house, or even his vehicle in other cities sometimes. He would make me walk and wander for hours, claiming he didn't want anything to do with me any longer, but then always return to pick me up and continue lecturing me on what I had somehow done wrong again, as he had always been doing before kicking me out. He put me through endless varieties of perception-bending situations like this, in which he continually convinced me of false realities and then quickly changed and confused me with new ones, all of which massively contributed to deeply entrenched trust issues I deal with every day that impose on every type of relationship I try to have. The countless memories of closing my eyes and praying to God to just make him stop will never leave me. There was even a time I got obsessively religious for a brief period, falsely believing that if I was faithful, somehow God would make it end. But I soon gave up on that. His sexual expectations of me continually increased over time, and even led to a number of fights and beatings because he became upset that I wasn't enthusiastic enough about what he was doing to me. The psychological results of his decision to rape me have now left me being triggered in the middle of trying to be intimate with other people, leaving me distraught and disconnected from reality. It stunted me in personally maturing or growing sexually, or from feeling comfortable doing so for that matter. Consequently, being comfortable with my body and sexuality has been yet another ongoing struggle I regularly face. And in that way, the abuse I faced has impeded on my ability to enjoy life and connection with other people in any attempts I make at relationships, both platonic and romantic. Despite bringing me into his home, promising to help me work through and heal from the many issues I had from my parents' poor treatment, instead he only intensified my mental illness and behavioral disorders. He frequently got upset with me for lying to him, but would then put me in situations where I feared that if I didn't try to lie, he would beat or rape me. I was always told that it was something I had done wrong that had caused his outbursts, but what he considered wrong became more and more difficult to discern as time went on. He was so chaotic about which actions of mine were correct and which weren't, that I got to the point of being terrified to do anything at all. I second-guessed every decision I made and had no confidence in my own intuition or judgment at all. I was so confused about what was right and what was wrong, because sometimes he would explode over a simple act like walking by the dishes, or other times he would understand that I needed to change my dress clothes before doing chores. If he ever judged that I had made a mistake of any kind, it often escalated to me getting beaten, and thus created a large amount of anxiety and fear in me associated with ever being wrong about anything at all. With this, his responses to my actions destroyed whatever self-confidence and trust in my own judgment that I may have had. Big blackout spot. Likewise, many simple things can end up triggering me into emotional unrest for all the various ways I've been abused. Simply sneezing is a good example in which the feeling is very similar to my memories of being punched in the nose, and thus simply experiencing a sneeze can often leave me experiencing sudden fear and anger on random occasions. Further, the way he put blame on me for the abuse he enacted massively contributed to an awful guilt complex and attachment disorder started by the childhood neglect I had faced before meeting him, but deeply worsened by his treatment. These issues, like many other things I've already mentioned, also still gravely impact my ability to interact or work with others to this day. His endless gaslighting antics have left me terrified of situations where I have to make decisions. Consequently, I frequently face emotional triggers whenever faced with the pressure of having to make any type of decision in a short time period. Even now, situations where I have to judge on my own what I should do rather than being directly told by a higher authority causes me genuine terror, as if I'm facing great danger if I make any mistake of any kind. This is actually an example of one of the many things I haven't been able to work through and heal from during my therapy, because I've had to hold on to so many traumatizing memories in order to testify for a trial that never ended up happening. He shamed and demeaned my belief in my own competency to the point that I was terrified to do many normal things in life, such as obtaining my driver's license, for example. He openly admitted to me once that he picked and chose when to get upset about things according to when he felt a lesson was due or not. And this lack of consistency in treatment has been a huge contributor to my deeply entrenched trust and confidence issues. His endless chaos of turning the house upside down and or planning events or trips, then claiming they had to be cancelled for a fight due to my misbehavior, further intensified my trust and anxiety issues when trying to relate with others. I'm very obsessive about things happening exactly when people say they will, and have anxiety attacks if anything in a plan ever gets changed. I was told that many of the instances in which he chose to turn the interior of the house upside down were caused by me not taking care of my chores as he felt was appropriate, and thus the state of my environment has become a huge point of obsession and triggering for me. I haven't been strictly diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder yet, but I do experience increased anxiety when my cups or plates aren't in the right places, and when anything in my space is out of place at all, for that matter. Seeing the messes that can sometimes build up as a result of my depression and physical pain preventing me from cleaning really imposes on my mental health that much more, with how much it can add to my anxiety about my environment in general. The overall impacts experienced during the actual active abuse are seemingly endless to list, but to begin with the financial impacts experienced during that time, he had opened 2 bank accounts with overdraft as well as 2 credit cards in my name, though he solely operated them himself. He then ran the balance of the accounts well past their limits. He told me at one time that he did this because he was sinking our life to show how upset he was about my misbehavior. It was only because I called the banks and credit card companies myself, explaining about his abuse and what he had done with the accounts, that they chose to let me slowly pay it off and not put me in collections. Thousands of dollars he put me into debt in 2011, but I just slowly paid it off because I knew I really had no other choice if I wanted to salvage my credit. And ultimately I ended up paying a good portion of it with my student loans, which are thousands of dollars I still owe and am currently unable to pay back due to my only income being disability as a result of the abuse he put me through and I am now forced to try to heal from. Furthermore, over the 6 years of physical abuse, he broke and destroyed many of my valuables, such as my childhood baby blanket, to teach me what it was like to have my objects disrespected. And he since has taken a vast majority of my property hostage in refusing to let me take it from his house back in the spring of 2013. With regard to the impact on my social interactions while being abused, first and foremost he separated me from my friends and family for 6 important years of my life. From the age of 14 to 20, I spent little to no time building connections with others as a result of the isolation and manipulation that my father put me through. I didn't participate in a significant number of recreational and extracurricular activities, friend gatherings, or just general opportunities to socialize and connect with others in any way because I walked through my school hallways feeling traumatized and violated, wanting nothing more than to hide the truth of my everyday life as much as possible, which meant not getting close with anyone. I was severely punished for attempting to reconnect with my childhood friends and siblings through social network accounts and in any other way. Birthdays, Christmases, holidays, special events of any kind that might have been shared among family and friends in those 6 years were completely missed by me as a result of the abuse and isolation that my father imposed. There was one occasion that I started to develop a crush on a boy, but my father quickly found out and fought with me about it. He beat me and scared me away from ever considering letting anyone close again. And along with this, he convinced me that my mother didn't love me and only wanted me for money. Though I won't deny that she certainly failed as a mother, this didn't mean she didn't love me at all. I've actually come to learn that he had massively manipulated her actions to further intensify my impression that she had no love for me at all, and never had. This was a rather cruel and painful experience to be put through at such a young age as 14. The level of abandonment and loneliness that I felt being convinced that the woman who gave birth to me had never felt any love for me at all is something that will never leave me, even after having learned that it wasn't true. I also missed out on many activities that I did try to participate in while living with him, such as music concerts and spirit events with my high school and university. I was more often busy laying at home nursing bruises with ice than busy attending my classes for almost my entire high school career. all the while lying to administration and telling them I was ill due to endometriosis, a condition I'm not actually diagnosed with. My father actually had to argue with the administration of HB-Beal in order to ensure that I graduated. I buried my head in my studies as a coping mechanism, even making the honor roll, but despite this, the administrators still insisted that I simply didn't have enough classroom hours spent to graduate. Facing this situation genuinely terrified me as it jeopardized my goal to get through school. It was paralyzing to think these goals that I had felt were worth sacrificing my body for and experiencing all the pain he put me through weren't going to happen. Along with many other events, he took my prom from me as well, by keeping me on the phone arguing with him for more than half of the dance and dinner. To my regret, he also convinced me not to go to the commencement ceremony after graduating, thus also taking that experience from me. In these ways and many more, he took many opportunities to insert himself and his abuse into my life. He even prevented me from participating in the activities of orientation week during my first year of university because I had a knee injury from him. Big blackout. She didn't feel I should describe how he had beat on my knee for hours. But I will be inserting here, even though she blacked it out, that it took me 6 months to recover from that injury, and it still affects me to this day. In the periods when I wasn't nursing injuries or doing schoolwork, I spent my time neurotically trying to avoid doing something he wouldn't disapprove of. This led me to sleeping countless hours and or laying in bed pretending to be asleep, fearing what I may do wrong if I got up. It became rather common during my summer vacation for me to sleep 16 hours a day, with my worst occasion reaching 21 hours of sleep. I actually embarrassingly ended up urinating in the bed as a result of not wanting to wake up on that particular occasion, and my father proceeded to blame me for ruining the mattress and publicly shamed me about the event a short time after. This was one of the many examples of situations he put me through that I look back on and still experience intense shame and self-hatred over to this day. A lot of this shame and self-loathing came from him convincing me that everyone in public who ever saw me misbehave, according to him, thought me to be a terrible, unruly child. He genuinely made me believe that everyone else in public would agree that I deserved to be treated poorly for behaving so unreasonably. There were actually many occasions of public embarrassment in which we would be in the middle of a store, restaurant, park, or public setting of some kind, and he would pronounce that my behavior was inappropriate. I often panicked at these moments, but always seemed unable to stop continuing to make actions he didn't approve of. Thus, the situation often devolved into him yelling at me in front of crowds of people and storming off, leaving me to follow with my head bowed. There were also occasions where he would yell at me from his vehicle after kicking me out of it, causing everyone on the street to stare, and even go so far as to change tables at restaurants, insisting he was embarrassed to be seen eating with me. These various different forms of public shaming have left me with intense hypervigilance issues whenever going to any type of public setting. This means I'm always on edge, trying my best to be able to see everyone around me in order to reassure myself that no one is staring. When I go to restaurants, I only feel comfortable when I'm able to sit in a seat that allows me to be able to see everyone else in the room, and I have extreme anxiety whenever facing any level of conflict or disagreement with someone while in a crowded space, for how it emotionally triggers me back to the times when my father would publicly shame me. In the more intense moments of our relationship, my father put me in situations where I genuinely thought my life was in danger, and on one of these occasions he would actually later explain that I had never really been in danger at all and was a fool to think so, which is yet another example of his gaslighting and manipulation. Tons of blackout. This is page 6, and she basically blacked out most of the fucking page, which infuriates me, but whatever. There are a lot of painful and degrading experiences he forced me through that I will never be able to forget, no matter how hard I try. I often ended up bleeding rather profusely from him hitting me on the head with some kind of object, to which he would always get upset with me for, and sometimes even beat me more as a result of bleeding on his floors. The left side of my face was beaten on so regularly while he was driving that now that side of my face is permanently more swollen than the right side. Yes, that's why my face is a little lopsided. And my right eye sags slightly as well. His abuse also left the right side of my lip very noticeably permanently swollen, all of which are also self-image issues I struggle with daily. To further elaborate on the physical impacts that I've experienced long-term, the Dr. Doctors have diagnosed me with a chronic pain condition called fibromyalgia, a condition that means I'm weak and my whole body experiences aches and pains all the time, every day. I experience such intense pain at times that it actually leads me to suicidal thoughts some days. I can't walk more than an hour without beginning to get sore, and shortly after that I end up limping to some degree from how much damage my knees have faced from my father's abuse. My research tells me fibromyalgia is often caused by intensive physical traumas such as car accidents or being beaten on for 6 years straight, at least once a week or more. I haven't experienced any other type of intensive physical trauma beyond the abuse my father put me through, so I'm not sure what else the source of these conditions could be, but I should clarify that this is ultimately personal deduction based off of my own personal research. It took me several sessions of sitting down to write this out because my arms are the most damaged of all. They're where most of my pain stems from, and it only gets worse the more I use them. I believe this is mostly the result of him beating my arms with metal bars around the age of 17. He also brought a kettle down on my left hand and broke one of the bones, which is another injury I wasn't allowed to receive timely medical attention for. On one of the occasions where he had my arms tied above my head in the basement while he was anally raping me, I simply couldn't handle the pain and coped by pulling on the rope that was tied around my hands to increase the pain in my hands and give myself a source of distraction from the pain of the rape. I came to find this caused me to lose feeling in part of my left hand, and I haven't regained feeling in that area since. This means the pain he's left me with has vastly diminished my ability to partake in many recreational activities I enjoy, such as playing my guitar, painting, video editing, or doing most anything in life that requires me to use my arms or hands at all. This means it's also becoming increasingly difficult to clean both my space and myself, cook, or even open simple bottles or jars. Some days I don't seem to even have the strength of a 3-year-old, and I don't really know why. Other days I'm okay, but these days are becoming less frequent with time, and I'm only 25. Further, my income is much too limited to get any assistance with any of these activities, so consequently, I'm only left with piling dishes, filth, and little food to eat as a result of my pain stopping me from caring for myself. All of these different physical pains cause me exceptional difficulty in trying to sleep as well. Because of this, I often have to seek the aid of muscle relaxants and sleep aids just to get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, if that. I can't remember the last time I slept all the way through a night and didn't wake up in pain, because putting pressure on any part of my body increases the pain I experience, and I have to put pressure on a lot of areas in order to lay down to sleep. Big blacked out paragraph. Emotionally, he's left me so empty and isolated, and yet so full of confusion and turmoil. He put very unreasonable expectations on me with the unhealthy ways he would obsess over my well-being and then quickly demean and abuse me shortly after. I've been in therapy for over 4 years now and still have much work to do before I can feel that the symptoms of the complex post-traumatic stress disorder I've developed from his abuse will be truly manageable. I've mentioned more than once now the symptoms of this condition leave me with nightmares and even daymares, which are basically traumatic triggers in which I'm forced to relive the abuse he put me through as if I'm actually actively experiencing it. And the nightmares I've been experiencing have increased exponentially since he began the endless stream of delays in these court proceedings started back in March, again massively impeding on my ability to sleep. Emotional triggers are what I suffer from most though, in which I still consciously stay in the present moment but lose control of my emotional state and begin crying or feeling angry for reasons I can't explain or identify. The depression that often results sometimes leaves me unable to cook, clean, bathe, or care for myself at all, and has also been yet another thing that has pushed me to suicidal thoughts and self-harm on more than one occasion. This escalated more and more during the time period just before reporting his abuse. My father would psychologically twist me up intensely, but always leave me feeling responsible for his actions. I was so worried about how much I hurt others that I genuinely wanted to take my own life. He pushed me so far that I ended up admitting myself to a psych ward in Victoria Hospital. I gave up upon him convincing me that I couldn't make it in life without him. I had decided I would rather be a mute in a mental ward than go on with life. Thus, I wandered over to Victoria Hospital, where I proceeded to tell them over and over that all I did was hurt people, because he endlessly preached that I drove him crazy, made him sick, and forced him to beat me. They admitted me based on harm to myself and others, but shortly after my father found me and convinced me to lie to them and tell them that what I was experiencing was just a brief first-year university breakdown. They released me the next day, and he later guilted me, telling me how awful I was and how everyone thought I was such a spoiled child for having put him through that experience. There was another occasion I ended up in the hospital because during an argument he insisted I was being too upset and proceeded to shove an Oxycontin down my throat. These were from one of his prescriptions. With the pill in my mouth, he raised his fist to my face, insisting I swallow or he would hit me. Shortly after that, he shoved a second one down my throat, saying I wasn't calm enough yet. That was an exceptionally traumatizing experience, which left me throwing up in the hospital and shamefully lying to nurses about how I ended up with drugs in my system. This event, along with the few other occasions his abuse led me to Victoria Hospital, has left me fearful to visit there again, lest they mistake my past for drug-seeking behavior. But despite all this terrible treatment, my father did still show me enough love throughout our relationship that when I first went to the police about the history of abuse that I faced, I still had a great deal of faith in his love for me as a daughter and a family member. Despite the fact that he had recently refused to give my possessions back from a house he claimed for years to have been bought for my 17th birthday, I still believed him to be honorable enough to admit the wrong things he had done. With this, I was actually certain he would merely bow his head, accept that I had reported his actions, and begin through the process of getting help for his unquestionable mental health issues. I was shocked to come to learn that he not only denied what he had done, but also fought to be released as soon as possible. From that point forward, I've been unsure how he feels about me, or if he wants to hurt me for reporting his abuse. He had threatened and scared me with tales of having connections to many dangerous people on the streets on many occasions while I had lived with him in the past. So in light of this, as well as the fact that he knew of my address, I feared for my life and for my residence, and felt the need to move. I was still afraid he would be watching me and find out my new address, because he claimed to have always been watching me in the past. But still, out of fear and uncertainty of what he might do, I felt safer moving out of London, and unfortunately this also meant moving out of London housing, which was allowing me controlled rent. This consequently began a great deal of financial difficulties for me, which only worsened my mental and physical health issues. When I moved, I ended up in a town that only had physical labor employment, and upon coming to learn that my increasing symptoms prevented me from properly performing physically demanding jobs, I was thus forced to turn to social assistance when I realized I couldn't perform the kitchen job I had initially gotten myself. This plummeted my income so low that I was forced to resort to a destructive rooming situation in order to afford housing, which further plunged my mental health into illness. I had never really had issues being afraid of an intruder before this, but ever since my father was released after initially being charged, I've been genuinely terrified of either him or someone he sent intruding in my space and hurting me, or even possibly setting my home on fire. I actually had a mental breakdown in the first few months after moving because I thought I saw him pulling out of a Tim Hortons in a town I was living in, and have since had a massive increase in nightmares surrounding the idea of him stalking me. I still frequently have panic attacks when trying to go to sleep at night, experiencing genuine terror as a result of hearing random, odd noises in my apartment. These situations leave me frozen in utter fear and terrified to open my eyes, but also much too scared to fall asleep, from fear that someone is in my room and trying to hurt me. It's only when fighting through tears and the paralyzing fear that I'm able to open my eyes and see I'm actually still alone and safe. This being yet another example of how my father's actions have negatively impacted my ability to sleep. Further, I've also ultimately had to drop out of university as a result of both feeling the need to move as well as simply not feeling able to perform while being forced through these court proceedings. This has massively impacted my self-worth because in not being able to perform and move forward with my education, I feel my life has been left completely stagnant and purposeless since these proceedings began. So overall, this entire situation has greatly weakened my ability to tolerate any level of anxiety and exceptionally increased my generalized fear for my safety that I experience on a daily basis. The traumatic stress disorder that I obtained from the abuse I faced over those 6 years has many symptoms and comorbid mental health issues that have greatly intensified throughout these latter experiences. These include such things as chronic nausea, anxiety, depression, and hypervigilance. I've also developed a condition called hyperhidrosis, where I sweat all the time when anxious, regardless of my body temperature. This has made even average encounters with other people increasingly stressful for me, as a result of the exceptional discomfort that comes from having my armpits continuously dripping with excessive sweat, with no real ability to stop or control it. Not only is it embarrassing, but the damp cloths decrease my body temperature, exacerbating the pain from my fibromyalgia in cooler weather. Everything he's done to me, with this court proceeding being the final straw, has frayed and broken my mental health in a way that have taken me and will take me many years to recover from, all the while leaving me unable to get an education and find employment that can accommodate my complicated illnesses. I'm on disability now and continue to struggle to access therapy in my attempts to continue the long journey to recovery. But ultimately, PTSD and fibromyalgia aren't things I can ever fully recover from. Management of symptoms is the best I can hope for. So there will never be another moment in my life that I won't be in some kind of physical or mental pain from what he chose to do to me in those 6 years. If the years of abuse and lasting damage weren't enough, he's also done everything he could to extend these proceedings as long as possible. With this, as I've mentioned more than once now, I've been forced to wait to be allowed to move on from the memories of all this pain, having been misled by my father's denial to believe I would have to reiterate and defend every detail in a trial. He delayed every opportunity to go to preliminary trial, and then only after I faced a week of chronic nausea and hours of utter fear while being driven into London did he decide, as I was en route, that he wanted to go straight to trial. And when the original trial date was finally impending, my health was at its worst. I was throwing up or nauseous every minute of the day and turning to the emergency room for help controlling my anxiety. But he presented a letter from a questionably qualified professional saying he wasn't able to stand trial. So with that, my life continued to get put on hold and my anxiety continued to get worse as I continued to have to recall the memories of his abuse as acutely as I possibly could so as to be able to testify yet another year later. Then, when the rescheduled date finally came around after waiting nearly 3 years from the first reporting it, all the while suffering in poverty, unable to work, tied to my traumatic memories, kept from my belongings, friends, family, and education, and also not being allowed the genuinely therapeutic experience of spending time with my family dog, Deckham. He actually insisted he was once again too ill the day before the trial and thus wanted to postpone it yet again. It was at that point that my heart truly broke. I could finally see he had only been fighting for self-preservation the whole way through. His further pushes for delays have also helped me see that his plea wasn't actually recognition of his illness, but merely admitting defeat and trying to reduce his sentence as much as possible. And the pain of these realizations is just indescribable. At the beginning of this process, I believed him to love me and to be my father. Now, I still see him to be the only father I've ever had, but I have absolutely no idea if he cares about me at all, or if I'm just some kind of enemy to him now. And that's probably the most painful part of it all. I feel that in trying to help my father get help for his very serious mental illness, I've lost him entirely. And I just don't know if I will ever know how to feel about that. Furthermore, I genuinely haven't been able to focus or think about pretty much anything else except this trial since the delay in June, because of how it leaves my family in limbo. Does my father love me? Does he hate me? Will he ever talk to me again? Will I ever see my dog again? These questions and many more constantly hang in the balance as I wait for these proceedings to conclude, and the endless waiting has genuinely led me to want to take my life once again. I don't know if anyone else in this room is aware of how tormenting that feeling can be to live with every waking moment. But it's so horrific I wouldn't even wish it on my father, despite him being the source of me experiencing it. I came from uneducated, impoverished, and neglectful people, molested and damaged, and was so desperate to heal and become a good, positive, capable, and contributing member of society. He took that desperate desire, as well as my trust, love, and naivety, and convinced me to endure more horrific pain and torture than could ever properly be put into words. Now that I'm not in that mentality, even I don't know how I endured it. He's still been the strongest source of family support I've ever had, yet for the past 3 years and some, he's kept himself and that support from me while keeping me stuck between this bureaucratical hell and our anguishing past. And in doing so extended his hold over my life beyond that nearly 6 years of weekly beatings and daily rapings. But still, he was also the only one to be there when I was about to fail several times in school, to pick me up, dust me off, and make sure I made it on time. He was the only one to go out under a car with a double hernia pouring out of his stomach to fix cars in order to get food to feed me. There were many times that I watched him take the shirt off of his own back and the food off his own plate in order to ensure I was warm and fed. And he even continued to try to support me once I had moved out of his house and stopped the physical and sexual abuses, though his emotional abuse did always carry on. But regardless, he showed me a level of care and sacrifice for my well-being that was unparalleled to anything else I've known. And though this doesn't negate that he also hurt me more than anyone ever had or ever will again, when coming from an environment of feeling completely alone and uncared for by even my own parents, the care he showed me has inevitably had a similar everlasting impact on me that his abuse did. He's still been more of a father to me than any other man in my life, and will always be my father no matter what happens. But sadly, the fact of the matter is that I can only have him in my life if he recognizes his illness and gets help. Before I ever went to the police, I begged him to please seek help for his illness and unquestionable disconnection with logic and reality. But he refused and insisted he didn't believe in psychology. So feeling I was without any other options, I went to the final authority who would have some ability to influence his actions, regardless of what he believed, and thus finally reported his abuse. When I first spoke to Officer Sutherland, I pleaded with her to help me forcibly admit him to a hospital that could help him. Unfortunately, she told me that she could only charge him for the laws he broke and then hope that he pled mentally ill. Thus, I'm here today, Your Honor, to explain how my father's actions have impacted me and how his illness and actions have destroyed both of who we are. My father is a very ill man who has made a great many mistakes and is in grave need of help in recognizing just how ill he is, as well as being shown that the resources available to the mentally ill can help him. So ultimately, I'm not here looking to have this man pay for his crimes. I'm here looking to explain what my father has done and have his obviously deeply entrenched illness recognized by a respectable representative of the law, in hopes that this will finally get him the help he needs to heal in whatever way he possibly can. I wanted all of the impacts he had on me to be known, not just the bad ones, but the good ones as well, and I ultimately wrote this statement hoping to shed light on the fact that what he's done can only be done by someone who is not only very sick and confused, but also loving too. So with this full spectrum of impact I've tried my best to present, as well as hopefully some insight from someone who has knowledge in psychology and can professionally analyze my father's illness, I hope Your Honor will be able to determine the appropriate amount of time necessary for my father not to be punished, but to be able to recognize his illness and access the correctional system's resources for what they are truly meant for: getting help and correction. I'm pretty damn conflicted about the end of it. I kind of don't want to include the whole that he still loves me part, because I don't know about that. But that's the statement that's been written, and it's tomorrow, so there's obviously no rewriting it. I don't even know what I would make the conclusion if I would change it. God, has my brain been fucked with through this? But anyway, so that's it. Took forever to read. Sorry. And believe it or not, it was longer. I skipped a bunch because they blacked it out, like I mentioned. But it's now 3 o'clock, and I haven't heard from her. So I have decent reason at this point to believe that tomorrow is actually proceeding, which is starting the anxiety up in my chest. As you can see, there's different parts. Basically, the beginning and end are very emotional for me. The middle is pretty fucking boring at this point. I've said it so many times and read it over so many times editing it, and it's mostly just the whole being a child and being taken advantage of part that makes me cry to talk about. But anyways, I will stop rambling because this whole vlog is going to be stupid long in the end. And I guess that's it for now. I'm terrified. I don't know if it's actually going to happen tomorrow, but I will obviously be letting you guys know one way or the other. In the meantime, that's the statement, and that's what I'm going to do tomorrow, is read that. Guess we'll see how it goes. Or if it goes. Ugh. I'm not even going to bother crossing my fingers at this point, there's no point. We'll just see.